are back in Revelation. And so if you'll remember, last time we met, we did chapter 16. And in chapter 16, we talked about the bowl judgments. And the bowl judgments are the final cycle of judgments in the book. And it's at this point that we finally get the overthrow of Babylon, right? And again, note that it is key that you understand that Babylon equals Rome, right? And as we go throughout this chapter, it's going to be clear and obvious that it's Rome that we're talking about. However, again, just as Rome is symbolic of Babylon, you also have every future world power that persecutes Christians is the same thing. In other words, all of those can be considered Babylon. And so why does it refer to Rome specifically first? Because it was written to people who live in the first century who were being persecuted by Rome, right? And so for it to make sense to them, it was about what was going on in their lives. Again, though, as John clearly believes, all evil, and we've talked about this several times, all evil is related, right? He would not see it as separate croppings up of evil. So, for instance, I always use the example because we always think of wars as different, right? And so you might look at, let's say we go back to the Revolutionary War, and then we talk about the Civil War. Well, in our minds, there's no relation between those two, right? I mean, not really. And then you talk about World War I. Well, there's no connection between World War I and the Revolution, right? Or the Civil War. And then you go World War II, then you go Vietnam, and you have, well, before that, I guess Korea, right? You have Korea, Vietnam. You have all these wars, and we think of them as different. John does not think that way. John says, no, these are all indicative of evil. It is all the same evil that is presenting itself, and it is a continuous evil that builds and builds and builds. And so it's not unrelated events. So therefore, John can talk about Rome and call it Babylon. And he can look forward to future persecutors of Christians and think of them as the same evil, right? Why was it that the early Christians used specifically Babylon as a code for Rome? Well, because, of course, Babylon in 586 BC, they had destroyed the temple, right? And that was a major deal in Judaism, obviously, that their temple of God had been destroyed. And so when Rome destroyed the temple in 70 AD, again, that was like the most horrible thing that could happen in Judaism particularly, and Christianity as well. It was a major event. And so Rome was seen as the same as Babylon. Note also in this, we're going to be talking about the prostitute. So when we talk about Babylon as the prostitute, notice that this is going to be a parody of the bride of the Lamb. So you have Babylon the prostitute versus the bride of the Lamb. The bride of the Lamb is the new city, right? And what is the new city made out of? The holy city is made up of believers, right? So you've got Babylon the prostitute, made up of evildoers, right, if you will. And then you have the bride of Christ, which is the holy city made up of Christian believers, right? And so that's kind of where we're going with all of this. All right, so starting at chapter 17. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." So note, first of all, when we had chapter 16, we talked about the bowl judgments, and the bowl judgments were on Babylon, but it was kind of a general overarching view of judgment. But what we're going to get now in the next few chapters, 17, 18, 19, is we're going to get in more detail a very symbolic view of what that judgment looks like. Again, though, please keep in mind that it is symbolic. We're not really talking about a prostitute. sitting on a dragon. We're not really talking about, we're talking about Rome specifically, but again, Rome as both a symbol of Babylon and for all world powers that will come that will eventually fall. Those who persecute Christians. And really, I hate to say it, all world powers fall eventually. Okay. So note, interestingly, when it introduces the prostitute, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters." Well, this again is going to parody the bride who is introduced in 21:9 in the same terms, right? Then came one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven plagues. It adds the seven plagues because the plagues have all played out. And spoke to me saying, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb," right? So these two are contra each other. In other words, you have constantly throughout the book of Revelation, you have, God works one way or God is described in one way, and then you have Satan or the beast described in a opposite way or a similar way that is a parody of the way God is described. And then it goes on and it says, "And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God." Again, symbolic, but notice it's the bride, the wife of the Lamb, and he carried me away in the Spirit and to the high mountain, and what did he show me? He showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, right? And so the holy city is, again, made up of Christian believers. That's the point. We're not talking about a literal city coming down out of the clouds. All right, again, it's a parody, so we already talked about that. Note that similar language is also used in the Old Testament. So in other words, this language is not new. So when we talk about like all of these judgments and things, and we've done these in the past lessons, remember, like when it seems scary and you got volcanoes and rocks falling on people and all of those things, and you say, well, what could that mean? Well, look at the Old Testament and look and see how those prophecies were fulfilled in, say, the fall of Babylon or the fall of Assyria or the fall of Tyre or the fall of any other number of places, right? Where they were described in the exact same terms, but then they fell. And how did they fall? They fell eventually by war, and they were conquered by some other people, but that's the way it was described. So again, we're talking about symbolic language. And similar symbolic language is used in the Old Testament of Nineveh, for instance, at Nahum 3:4. "And all the countless whorings of the prostitute, graceful and of deadly charms, who betrays nations with her whorings and peoples with her charms," right? So you have the same language used of Nineveh in Nahum, right? And then you have the same language used of Tyre in Isaiah 23:17, where it says, at the end of 70 years, the Lord will visit Tyre, and she will return to her wages and will prostitute herself with all the kings of the world on the face of the earth. So again, that whole idea of working with other nations and persecuting God's people in general, it's seen as prostitution. If you find comfort in the world against God, then you are participating in this type of prostitution. That's the point. Oh, sorry. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, so it's the same thing, we're just going to explain different parts. "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters." Notice that being seated on many waters in the ancient world meant that the city or nation was a great trade center. In other words, that's the point. And so we get language like that, not only in that's going to be clarified in 17:15. "And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages," right? And so again, Seated on many waters means that you basically, it comes from the illusion of having ships being able to come and bring merchandise and things. And we're going to get, as we go on, we're going to get into the types of things that Rome does, including slavery and things like that that are against God, aside from just persecuting God's people, which is bad enough. You can also see in Jeremiah 51:13, considering the literal Babylon. O you who dwell by many waters, rich in treasures, your end has come, the thread of your life is cut. So note, being seated on many waters means that you are rich in treasures. And again, that's because you're wealthy in trade, right? With whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality. How do they commit sexual immorality? By trading with Rome. And with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. So what does that mean to be drunk from the wine? It means to be drunk from the comforts provided by the evil empire, if you will. Note that as a great center of power and trade, Babylon, Rome leads the world. In order to prosper under the empire, the nations must accommodate whatever egregious violations Rome does, whatever, what do we call them today? Bad things. What am I trying to say? Human rights violations, right? Human rights violations that Rome participates in. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. You okay? You good? I just want to make sure, okay? All right, notice that the beast represents the emperor. But so when we talked about the beast, and again, you can go back and watch the lesson again if you don't remember. But so we have the dragon, which is clearly Satan, identified as Satan. And then we identified the beast as the emperor / the empire, right? And then we have the second beast, which was the one who forced you to worship the first beast. And so that's the emperor cult, both the emperor cult and the pagan worship cults, right? And so here you have the beast representing, again, the emperor or the empire, but it's scarlet, but the scarlet representing royalty also associates it with the red dragon. And again, the red dragon is clearly Satan, right? It's showing, again, and we talked about it back then, it's showing that the empire is working with Satan. And in other words, an evil empire, if you will, they are on the side of Satan. That's the point. That's what John is trying to say. He doesn't want you to associate with the empire because you're going to be associating with Satan. Basically, worshiping the emperor or worshiping these pagan deities, you're doing the will of Satan, and that's obviously not good. The blasphemous names are, again, claims to deity, and we talked about that in the past as well. 7 heads and 10 horns are symbols of power and authority, right? The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of the abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. Okay, so this is a terrible picture. Note that what we have in view here is a high-class prostitute, okay, because she's adorned in all of these jewels and pearls and scarlet and purple and all of this stuff. And so that would be something that only a rich person could get. And so Rome, again, pictured as a high-class prostitute. So it's basically saying, look, Rome may seem really appealing, but it's not. In other words, it's evil, and it's working for Satan, and you're giving up your morals and your values, your Christian morals and values, if you choose to follow. Purple and scarlet are symbols of royalty, while the gold and jewels and pearls are meant to show how tempting the prostitute can be. But then we see the cup full of the wicked deeds of her sexual immorality. Again, sexual immorality isn't necessarily literal here, as throughout the book, idolatry itself has been described as unfaithfulness and sexual immorality. However, in some pagan cults, there was some inherent sexual immorality. So in other words, if you, for instance, went to a fertility cult, then you may get with a temple prostitute, because in the ancient world, without getting too far in the weeds or too gross, basically the way they saw it was if you didn't have fertility, whether it be your land or your wife couldn't have children or whatever it may be, you would go to a temple prostitute. And then that act that you would perform with the temple prostitute would then spark the gods to do the same act, and then therefore the land would become fertile, or your wife would be able to have children, or whatever it may be. And so that was technically the point, even though I don't know that there weren't some, more purient, just simple interest there, and in that whole deal. But note again that this description of the purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels, but then holding this cup of sexual immorality, notice that it is in contrast to the bride of Christ, who is described in 19:8. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saint, right? And so you want to follow the bride or be part of the bride. You don't want to be with the prostitute. And so note too that if you'll remember back when we did chapters 2 and 3, that was the point, is that you wanted your white garments, right? You wanted your clean white garments because that showed purity. In other places, it was garments with blood and such, right? Because again, the blood of the saints washed the garments, or the blood of Christ washes the saints, on the clothing. And so there are two different places where it's described in two different ways. So then on to 17:5. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. Okay? So again, the name on the forehead is symbolic for showing where someone's loyalties lie. All of these names and marks and all of that, they're not literal. They simply mean that you will be marked by your behavior, depending on who you follow, right? So you're either one of God's people as part of the holy city, or you will be marked as one of the beast people, as an earth dweller and follower of the prostitute, right? And so again, John is saying you don't want to follow. When you look at Rome as just this overbearing, I just can't, you have to join it because you can't get away from it. And you can't make a living without it, so therefore you might as well just say, you know what, I'm just going to have to join. Well, so John, instead of showing you all of these things that Rome has to offer, John shows you the beast and the dragon, and he shows you the prostitute and all of these terrible images that he puts in your head so that you will no longer see the evil empire as something that must be followed or grants you some, freedom or wealth or all of those things, because John basically shows it for what it is, an evil, disgusting empire, right? That's the point. Note that earth's abominations are all of the human rights violations. Right here where it talks about the abominations, they're the human rights violations perpetrated by the empire through its desire of material gain and power. And again, we'll get into this as we move on through the next chapters. So I have a very logical mind, and so I like to have analogies. And so I tried to create an analogy that would kind of get us from the actual whole prostitute vision to what they would have seen it as in the first century to what we could see it as in some small way today. Okay, so again, this is probably not the best analogy that I could come up with, but it is what I came up with. So this is the way we're going to do it. All right. So the literal meaning of the prostitute, right? So note that prostitution is clearly against the will of God. But one wants, and when I say one, I just mean a person, right? A person. But one wants the gratification that she offers. So one visits the prostitute, one receives gratification in whatever way from the prostitute, one's desires turn away from God and to the prostitute as the object of gratification right here and right now, right? One doesn't consider that he or she is helping to build up the human rights violations, family turmoil, and other consequences of prostitution, which is contrary to Christianity, right? So that's what it means to go to a prostitute. So now what is this analogy that John is making in the first century? Clearly, pagan worship is against the will of God. But one needs a job and to be seen as a good member of society or a team player in order to work. One goes to the pagan temple or worships the emperor. One receives gratification through gaining a reputation as a good member of society or a team player and receives work. One's desires turn away from God and to the pagan temples as an object of gratification right here and right now. And that gratification, in that case, is finding work or to gain social status. One doesn't consider that he or she is helping to build up the empire which is persecuting Christianity, right? So that's what it meant in the first century. So now maybe a way that we don't think of it today. And again, before I use this analogy, I'm just going to point out that I have every technology known to man, and so I am not saying that I somehow am better than you are. I'm just using it as an analogy, and as I came up with the analogy, I felt bad because I do own every technology known to man. But here's an analogy that would be similar for today. Clearly, Chinese communism and human rights violations are against the will of God. But one has to have the new phone, TV, game system, etc. One goes to the store and buys the new device, supporting the communist government of China. One receives gratification through using the phone, watching the TV, playing the game, etc. One's desires then turn away from God and to the various devices as objects of gratification right here and right now, as entertainment to fill our time, right? One does not consider that he or she is helping to build up the communist government which is persecuting Christianity, right? So that is an analogy that would be similar, right? It would be a similar idea because everything that we buy from China and most of the things that we buy come from China, that just helps to build up that communist government, right? If you think that I know you don't, but if you think that the people who build things are the ones who are making money off of the money that we send over there, obviously that is not correct. So look, that's the way it is. I mean, you look at it and you say, okay, so, I mean, what do you do? I mean, I don't have an answer because, I mean, I hate to say it, but does that mean I'm going to crush my cell phone? No, probably not, right? So, but that's a choice, right? That's a choice that we've all made. And so, again, it is a similar idea. It is a similar idea. So, again, I don't have we're going to all take our technology out and burn it, but it's just a similar analogy. 17:6, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast because it was and is not and is to come. Okay, so note again, we have another parody. Note that the beast who was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit is a parody of both God and Jesus, who were referred to as the one who is, who was, and who is to come, right? And if you've never heard that, then you've never heard that song by Carrie Job, which every time I say that, I think of that song. It plays out in my brain. Again, the model here is Nero, who Romans, Christians, and Jews believed would return with the Parthians as raised from the dead. Because again, when Nero, who was the poster child for persecutor of Christians, Nero killed himself, but his body was taken away before people could see it by some of his followers, and they buried him. I'll be honest with you, and I never thought of this, it just popped in my head. It's kind of like when Osama bin Laden was killed, right? And so what did they do with Osama bin Laden? They buried him at sea, right? They dropped his body off in the ocean so that nobody could, want to see his body or whatever it may be. And I'm not saying that there are people who believe that he's still alive, but in other words, you could see where some people may say, well, he's still alive because we hadn't seen the body, right? Well, so it's a similar deal here where again, universally, Christians, Jews, and Romans believed that Nero would return. And so it would be like he was returning from the dead because, again, he was, he supposedly died, but they believed he would come back. This description is a parody of Jesus' resurrection, right? Again, and be very careful that you don't misquote me. I am not saying that there will not be a future Antichrist, but I am saying that Nero is the model for that Antichrist figure. Any Antichrist figure, again, James talks about several Antichrists, and again, that doesn't mean there's not going to be a be-all, end-all Antichrist, but Nero is the poster child for that. And so Nero is the mold, if you will, right? And again, so how could you look at that? Well, look at how, for instance, John the Baptist fulfills the role of Elijah, right? People absolutely believed that Elijah was going to return from the dead, right? And then the New Testament authors clearly equate John the Baptist with Elijah, right? Does that mean that they believed that John the Baptist was literally Elijah raised from the dead? No. It meant that he fulfilled the role that Elijah filled, right? Or that Elijah was prophesied to fill. Well, again, same thing with Nero. It doesn't mean that Nero is going to come back to life at some future point in time and he's going to be the be-all, end-all Antichrist, but the be-all, end-all Antichrist will be someone like Nero. That's the way this whole, we call it a typology, right? And that's the way a type works. So there's that. This calls for a mind with wisdom. Notice that in chapter 13, when we had to calculate the number of the beast, it called for wisdom, right? And so again, hint, hint, we're talking about Nero. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Note that Rome is the city on 7 hills, okay? And every person in the ancient world would have understood that. When they saw the 7 mountains, they would have immediately thought of Rome, right? Vespasian, from 69 to 79, he issued coins that portrayed the goddess Roma seated on the 7 hills of Rome. In other words, we had coinage, and the goddess Roma, she was seated on the 7 hills. And so this is also going to give you kind of a background for the woman sitting on the dragon, right? It's the same kind of idea. And I did not check to see if it came through. Oh, it did. And there it is. There's the coin of the goddess Roma sitting on the 7 hills of Rome, right? And so this is what we're talking about. We're clearly talking about Rome. And again, everybody would have known it. And some people will say, well, all these codes and such are used so that the Roman Empire didn't know that John was talking about them. Well, just for the record, they absolutely would have understood that they were in the book of Revelation. In other words, any good Roman, Jewish person or Christian in John's time who read Revelation, they would have absolutely understood it to be about the Roman Empire. And again, I don't remember the verse, but even, like we look back at 1 Peter, I think it was, where he talks about Babylon, and he's clearly talking about Rome. So it's just phrases and such that people used, but it's not like it was a big secret, and like, if a Roman opened it up and they'd say, I don't know what this means. No, they would have known what it meant. And like things like 7 hills, the 7 hills or the 7 mountains, they would have absolutely understood that. It's very subversive, just for the record. It's very subversive literature. So you have that. But then they are also 7 kings, right? 5 of whom have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. Okay, so note that it's what we call multivalent meanings. There are several meanings. So it's Rome, but then it's also 7 kings, and you have all of these different meanings. And it's like I described to you at the very beginning of the study. It's as though John takes a whole bunch of pictures, and he just throws them in your face, right? And that's what the book of Revelation is meant to do for you. It's to just throw all of these images in your face, okay? Notice that the 7 kings represent the full or complete nature of the beast's power as manifested in wicked kingdoms, i.e. Rome here, but symbolic of all wicked world powers, right? The king who is must be Domitian. Again, people want to look at this and they want to say, oh, this is all talking about future events and all of that. Well, it's written to some group of people, Christians, living in the 1st century. So when they see this, that it's the king that is now, they're going to say, oh, it's Domitian, clearly. It wouldn't make sense for it to be somebody else because it's written to them. They understood what the book was about. They understood all of these symbols because, again, it's written to them first. When we did chapters 2 and 3, the whole point was don't follow the empire, stay faithful to Christ. And then when you get past chapter 3 and you get to 4 and 5, you see first the throne room of God, then you see Christ in fulfillment of Daniel 7, 13, and 14. And then you get why you don't want to follow the beast and how evil the beast is. And the beast, again, is the empire. So the king who is must be Domitian, right? So if you count back, skipping Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, who were, each of the 3 of them, they ruled for very short periods of time, like 3 months each, and they were skipped, just for the record. So it's not like you just say, well, if you just skip them, I mean, you can't just skip things if they're important, right? But if you look at ancient literature and some of the ancient historians, they will skip over them as well, right? So it's standard practice to skip over them. Then you can include Nero, right? The 8th belongs to the 7 and will return means Nero, right? The 8th represents the final before judgment, one like Nero, just like we just talked about. The point, though, is that John is using symbolic number 7 in order to put together all of his symbols, right? Because he uses 7. He's doing it on purpose. It's not like it just so happens that everything he sees is 7. You know, and I was listening to a podcast one time, and it was interesting because Michael Heiser, who is actually my Hebrew professor, or one of my Hebrew professors, he described it this way. And I think sometimes we look at John and we think that, you know, God just shot all these images into his head, and he was just writing them as he was getting them, and they were just, and it was like he was just like a conduit that was, you know, instantly writing all this stuff down. And that's not the way it would have been. John receives all these visions, he sits down and he thinks about it, and then he writes about the visions that he sees in an apocalyptic genre. In other words, he sits and thinks about it. And you say, well, I don't know about that. Well, my goodness. All of the books in the New Testament are clearly written considerably after their time. So, for instance, Jesus, who was crucified in about 30, well, the earliest gospel is written in about 60 or so, right? And that would have been the Gospel of Mark. And so clearly, Mark had time to think about it. Luke had time to think about it. Matthew had time to think about it. The Gospel of John is not written until the 80s. That's why it's so theological, because John had time to think about it, right? And so that's why it's like this. And so John makes a conscious decision to use the number 7. So the point is simply the fulfillment of all evil kings, right? And so that would be of all time. And so Nero, symbolically here, being the one that was part of the first, but then he will return, again, the point is simply that Nero will return, not literally, but in some Antichrist figure in the future. That's the point, right? That's the point. And it is at that point that all time will end, evil will be judged, and the righteous will make up the new kingdom, right? That's the point we're getting at. Again, you have to interpret it first in the way those people would have understood it, because the book is written to those people in the first century. If they wouldn't have understood it, then the interpretation is not correct. That's basically, that. If I can leave you with anything, that's it. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. All right, so the 10 horns are representative of Rome's system of client kings. So what they would do is they would basically give these different kings power. They would trade with them. The kings would pay tribute to Rome, and then we would have a happy situation where everybody's happy. Not really. Rome's happy. The kings may be happy. The people are not happy because the people are the ones who are losing out. Symbolically, they represent the totality, 10, of nations allied with the beast / prostitute / Babylon / Rome / any evil empire, and therefore also Satan, right? So these are nations that are allied with Satan. Again, not that we're talking about specifically 10 nations that we can call out by name and say, okay, well, one nation is this and one nation is that, and this must be the other nation. It's not that. It's just symbolic of the whole idea of working with the evil empire. And again, who's influencing the evil empire? Satan, right? Satan is influencing the evil empire. Notice that 1 hour simply means a short time. So the point is that their time will be short. The shortness of time is in comparison to the eternity or the eternality of the reign of Christ, right? These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast, right? Because again, they are clients of the beast, and in order to make money and such, even other kings will do it. You either join in and let's make some money together, or we will destroy you and we will put someone else in charge. That's the way evil empires work. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. Note that King of kings was the title for Babylonian kings. Also the Parthian kings. And Rome saw themselves as king over all other kings, right? But don't look to those kings of kings. Look to the true King of kings, who is Christ. That's the point. That's what we're getting at. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. Note that this is again a picture of the judgment of Rome by the client kings, along with Nero and Parthia, right? Again, this is all symbolic. It's not literally, Nero does not come back with Parthia. He's dead. He was dead, and he stayed dead. Note that Nero also destroyed part of Rome by fire. If you'll remember back when we did the earlier chapter and we talked about the reason that he persecuted Christians was he burned part of Rome, and then he blamed Christians because turns out people don't appreciate you burning their houses and such so that you can redecorate, and that's what he wanted. And so when he did it, they were unhappy, so he blamed Christians. That's what sparked the first widespread persecution of Christianity. And so note that this whole idea here of burning her up with fire is kind of a slight hint to that whole idea. Again, what is the point here? Because now you have the client kings fighting Rome. The point is that there's no honor among thieves, right? Eventually, evil powers will defeat other evil powers, right? And that happens all the time. I think of it kind of in terms of Germany and Russia, right, during World War II. So you get Germany, and of course they're trying to take control of everything, and then Russia, and they're like, hey, what do we do? And Germany says, hey, you know what? We'll make a treaty, and then we'll just work together. And so Russia was like, okay. And then what happened? Once Germany got all their power consolidated that they thought they could do to end up fighting Russia, what did they do? They attacked Russia. And they got all the way to the capital of Russia, right? So that's the same way that we're talking about evil treats evil. You don't trust evil powers, right? Evil world powers will eventually turn on themselves because they want more power. And that's the way it is. And Germany and Russia are the prime example of that back in the day. Oh, there it goes. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out His purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Again, who has dominion over the kings of the earth at the time this book is written? Rome, right? But again, does that mean... Remember we talked about the preterist view when we first talked about this, and preterists believe that that everything in the book of Revelation is done and over with. It was all done and over with in the first century, and there's no future aspects. That's not right. That is not right. Clearly there are future aspects, but again, you have to interpret it first the way it was written to the first people, and then you can apply it to how things will go throughout history. And again, as we talk about Germany and Russia, not that Germany is an evil empire right this minute, or we don't consider it an evil empire, I wouldn't think. Russia, maybe more so, right? That's the way evil works. And so just because we're interpreting these visions and such, which is the right way to do it, as Rome, and we're talking about Rome, well, again, it's just another example of the way evil works. And so we'll have the same evil throughout history over and over and over again. And again, it's not unrelated evil. It is the same evil. And I guess the way to look at it is if you, and I try not to do this. I mean, clearly Satan is involved in, evil in general, but I try not to say, we live in a fallen world, right? And so, evil is just inherent in the world the way it is. And so I think sometimes we give Satan too much credit, right? But I think if you do look at it as, if I look at all those wars that I talked about before, I'm not going to go through them all again, but if I talk about all those wars and we think about them in terms of, they're different wars, right? So they're all different. Well, if we think of it as Satan is behind them all, then you look at it differently and you say, oh, well, it's all the same evil, right? It's all the same evil. And so that's kind of what's going on here, is all of this is interpreted as Rome because that's who this first audience is dealing with. They're dealing with Rome. They're being persecuted by Rome. But a Christian in China right now, or in some Muslim country where there's radical Islamist rule, those people would interpret their situations as where they are right now. And they would find the same hope in this book that those people found in the first century. That's the beautiful part about it. And then, God forbid, we have to go through it, but at some point in time in the future, if we go through really bad persecution, then again, or even not bad persecution, if you're persecuted at all, you find hope in the fact that eventually evil is going to be defeated. God is going to destroy evil, judge evil, and the righteous will be deemed worthy, right, and righteous. And so that's the hope to keep going all the time, no matter how your Christianity is persecuted. And that's where we're going. And again, we're going to continue. We're going to draw out over the next couple of chapters. Now, we're going to draw out this whole idea of the defeat of ultimate evil, because that's the message that people who are being persecuted need to hear. They need to know that at some point in time, this is going to end. Think about it in terms of disease, right? Let's say you have cancer. If the doctor comes in and says, hey, listen, you're not going to make it. Well, are you going to fight? If the doctor says you can't do anything about it, I'm sorry, you've got 6 weeks to live. Well, there's no reason to fight, right? Or, you may have reason to fight, but I'm just saying it's not going to encourage you very much. But if the doctor comes in and says, hey, you have cancer, we're going to fight this thing, and you can win, then what are you going to do? You're going to fight it, right? And so that's what's going on here, is it's to give you the hope to fight, because you know that in the end, at some future time, all evil will be destroyed. And the evil that you're under right now is going to be destroyed as well. Whatever evil it is will be judged at some time. Now again, the point is not that you will be protected from that evil. You may die under that evil, right? And that's the point. But that's how you conquer, is by staying faithful even unto death, right? And that message has been played out several times throughout the book. And we talked about it over and over and over again. It's simply to give you the hope to persevere even unto death. It's not to give you some promise of God's not going to make you go through bad things. That is the complete opposite of what the book of Revelation is about. It's clearly saying you're going to go through bad things. So prepare for it and just know that God will defeat evil in the end, even though you may not be on earth when that happens. But you'll still be, you'll take part as all of the martyrs underneath the altar, right? Because that's where the blood of the sacrifices go. They go under the altar. And so you've got all of these martyrs under the altar saying, when is evil going to be judged? Like evil is rampant all across the earth. And God says, what does he say? I'm going to do it right now? No, he says you have to wait, right? You have to wait. But the hope is that eventually evil will be judged. But you have to go through it right now, and that's the point, right? Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or question. And if you found this video helpful, hit like. And if you would like to be notified when new videos are released, hit subscribe and join us next time as we study the Bible in context.